The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote that it makes no sense to call a torture victim happy, no matter how virtuous he is. Aristotle considered personal virtue necessary to living a truly good life, but even he recognized that the relationship between virtue and flourishing was contingent. People who fell victim to extreme bad luck or found themselves deprived of the external needs necessary for flourishing could never lead a good life, even if they were perfectly virtuous. It seems fairly obvious to everyone that oppressed people can't be truly happy. But what about their oppressors? The torture victim is obviously miserable, even if they're virtuous, but what about their torturer? Can the torturer be truly happy, even if they are not virtuous? Or is their perceived happiness just a comforting illusion of the good life? This is the ancient philosophical dilemma that confronts one August Ransom Augie Smith, the Blue Dragon of Peacemaker Season 2's Nazi world, and confronts Peacemaker himself, along with we, the audience. The reveal in Episode 6 that Peacemaker's supposedly best dimension ever was actually a world where the Nazis won World War II was barely a surprise to many fans of the show. Christopher Smith's tunnel vision and myopic focus on his own loneliness may have blinded him to the reality of his slow radicalization, but we, the audience, along with Chris's friends who entered this world to retrieve him, immediately clocked the glaring problem with this dimension. What did surprise a lot of people, however, was the reveal that the Nazi world version of Chris's father, Augie, was actually secretly not, in fact, a Nazi. Even though his sons, the alternate version of Peacemaker himself, whom Chris tried to replace after accidentally killing him, and Chris's older brother Keith, Captain Triumph, who's still alive and well in this world, apparently were Nazis. Lest we forget that Keith whipped up a lynch mob against Chris's black lesbian friend Adebayo. Now, a lot of people misunderstood what was happening here. Introducing DCU fans to Nazi world, which many surmised was the infamous Earth X of DC lore, was not the point of Peacemaker Season 2. This wasn't a world-building project. James Gunn will almost certainly forever close the door, literally and figuratively, on Nazi world and the rest of the Quantum Unfolding Chamber going forward. The only setup for future stories that matters here is the creation of a stable and movable doorway to the prison planet's salvation in the season finale. Peacemaker Season 2's story was focused on Chris's descent into and then rise out of crippling loneliness, and Nazi world was only a plot device to provide him with a comforting, seductive illusion. Fans who got wrapped up in speculation about whether we'd see cameos of alternate versions of big DCU characters, especially Overman, the Nazi Superman, were missing the point. Nonetheless, the reveal that Augie 2 was secretly not a Nazi understandably sparked a lot of discourse about what it means to be a good person. Mostly because this reveal was a surprise. Some fans had assumed that the reason Augie 2 was so well adjusted in this world was because this world had given him everything that Augie 1, Chris's racist father from the main timeline, had ever wanted. Namely, a white supremacist world. So the reveal that he wasn't a Nazi or even a bigot at all in his heart was a genuine curveball and a nice bit of storytelling. But it does raise troubling and intriguing moral questions. Even though Blue Dragon scolds Harcourt when she calls him out for his apparent complicity in the American Nazi regime, since she obviously does not fight every single injustice she knows about either, the show goes out of its way to emphasize that Augie's wealth and comfort depend upon the exploited labor and murderous cruelty of the off-screen camps.
I mean, anything anyone has here is at the expense of those who are considered outsiders, forced to toil away in camps their entire lives.
Augie defends his position by saying he fights the monsters, madmen, and murderers in front of him because that is what he can control. After all, what can any one person do, even a wealthy and powerful person, against an oppressive system as overwhelming as the one which rules his version of America? A lesser storyteller than James Gunn might have left it there, and allowed the narrative to advocate Augie 2's position as the correct one. But Gunn doesn't let Augie 2, or us, off the hook so easily. He also shows us that Vigilante 2, a white man who also benefits from this racist system and also has a family to lose, has chosen nonetheless to fight for the Sons of Liberty, the anti-Nazi resistance movement of this world. And so, the audience is left with a dilemma. What is the right moral stance for a person who is privileged by an oppressive system? How much is such a person obligated to risk or sacrifice for the greater good? Can the torturer, and more troubling, those who benefit from the torturer's actions even without participating in them, ever be truly flourishing? In 2007, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum archives came into possession of one of the most disturbing photographic records of life in and around the Nazi extermination camp at Auschwitz ever seen. This record is disturbing not for what it shows about the treatment of prisoners, but for what it reveals about the lives of the people who ran the camp. In this record, called the Hoker Album, we see SS officers and their friends continuing to party and revel even into the final months of the war. We see them playing with their pets, decorating Christmas trees, wining and dining at dedication ceremonies, joking around with each other, smiles and laughter everywhere. We see photos from a vacation resort set up 20 miles away from Auschwitz, where officers and auxiliaries enjoyed themselves sunbathing and eating blueberries while being entertained by musicians. All of this while operating the deadliest extermination camp of the Holocaust, where more than 1 million people were tortured and murdered. To all outward appearances, these folks are happy, content, joyful, availing themselves of the simple pleasures and leisure time that Aristotle maintained were necessary for the cultivation of the good life, for the state of being that he called eudaimonia, the highest possible human good. But necessary and sufficient are different things. The people in the Hoker Album and the citizens of Peacemaker's Nazi world constructed a social reality for themselves in which they can convince each other that they are good and happy people. After all, they love their country and their pets. They may even be good parents to their kids, as Augie too was to his sons, despite their apparent failures to learn from his example. They probably go to church or engage in other social functions that allow them to feel connected with each other and with what they perceive as some deeper reality, all without ever having to acknowledge the horrors that make their apparent happiness and goodness possible. And even those among them who can see through this veil, like Blue Dragon does, still struggle to fully let go of the benefits those horrors bring them. Some choose, again like Augie, to focus only on the monsters, madmen, and murderers in front of them. Others, too many others, choose to look away entirely, acknowledging to their secret selves that they don't agree with any of this, but never taking any risks to change it. Rarest among them are the ones like Vigilante 2 and the Sons of Liberty, who lay down their lives and reputations to fight a system they almost certainly cannot defeat, for there is honor in fighting impossible battles when one is on the right side. This is the essence of privilege under an unjust system. It traps even those who benefit from it in seemingly inescapable moral quandaries. So many retreat into the illusion of the good life that such a system provides them, and tend to get very defensive when their complicity is called out, revealing that they're not enjoying the good life at all, but rather indulging the banal vices of domination. What they may seem to possess in flourishing, they also lack in equal measure in practical wisdom, and thus their lives are not virtuous, even if they seem happy to all, including themselves. So, what's the answer? Who is right? Is it Augie, who does what he can for the people in his immediate proximity? Or is it Vigilante, who risks everything for the cause? Or is it Peacemaker himself, who's oblivious to the injustice of the system because he's too wrapped up in his own issues to notice, but acts swiftly and with perfect moral clarity the instant he's presented with the truth? The classic move in Aristotle's ethics would be to seek, identify, and cultivate within oneself the golden mean, the virtue that lies between two opposing extremes. So, The virtue of courage, for instance, would be the golden mean between the vices of complete recklessness at one end and total cowardice at the other. Peacemaker Season 2 presents us with two options in Augie and Vigilante for responding ethically within an overwhelming system of unearned privilege and the hidden atrocity that makes it possible. Augie embodies the classic virtue of justice in giving each person before you what is their due in the proper way. Vigilante leans more into the classic virtue of courage, sticking to his chosen path because it is noble to do so, though Augie is clearly no coward himself. But both are motivated by a more modern virtue, and that is where the moral dilemma lies. That more modern virtue is empathy, the proper regard for and ability to experience another person's perspective. Empathy would be the golden mean between complete indifference to the suffering of others at one extreme and inaction born of moral paralysis at the other. Empathy, in the face of great suffering among other people, requires action. The problem is that there's no easily identifiable midpoint between indifference and moral paralysis. Every course of action between those two extremes feels inadequate and can easily make someone feel guilty over never doing enough. Blue Dragon knows perfectly well what kind of system he lives in. He's convinced he can't defeat the system alone, even with his great wealth, so he chooses to limit the scope of his actions to those whose lives he can immediately impact. Vigilante knows the system too, and chooses to fight on abstract principle for the benefit of people he'll probably never meet. His choice puts not only himself, but his entire family at risk. Both choices are understandable. Both are justifiable, with strong moral arguments in their favor. Yet, neither feels like quite the right answer. Neither feels like it could ever be enough. Augie could do more than he does with his resources, like maybe hide racial minorities in a quantum unfolding chamber now and then. Vigilante could be more prudent in his resistance by giving his family a choice in whether to risk their lives and freedom. But it's hard to say that either of them are truly wrong, or completely right. Both men are virtuous, and yet both are failing to truly flourish. Because a system of unearned privilege built on and maintained by atrocity makes eudaimonia impossible for everyone. The tortured man cannot be happy, no matter how virtuous he is. The torturer cannot be virtuous, no matter how happy he thinks he is. The rest of us can only do the best we can, burdened by the knowledge that none of it will ever be enough. But that's no reason not to do it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Be sure to make all the other proper offerings to the great god algorithm, and until next time, remember that what's best in life is to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and engage in discourse with the women.